Oftentimes, the Bible is presented as the great answer book. All of the great problems, all the great questions, are right here for you to look up and find the answer. There is, of course, some truth to this. You can read the Bible and you can get clarity about what matters and what doesn't matter in life. You can read the Bible and you can get assurance that God is for you, loves you. There are people, though, who hawk themselves as experts. They'll hold the Bible up and they'll say, like Pat Robertson, who has a book entitled Answers to 200 of Life's Most Probing Questions. So he can open up this Bible, he can tell you the answers, it settles the matter, send $100 to his 700 club, and everything will be fine. But there are problems with the notion that the Bible, seeing the Bible primarily as an answer book. Because there's a big difference between knowing the right answer and then living out of that answer. Having a consistency in one's life between the right answer and one's life. And the passage that Bob just read for us, one of the significance of it is that it's the first time in the gospel, and it occurs midway through, that a human being gives the right answer as to who Jesus really is. It's Peter. You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. It's the right answer. But there's some curious things here. First, Jesus tells the disciples sternly, don't tell anybody this answer. That's odd. Another interesting thing is, although human beings have not been putting forth this truth, there have been evil spirits that have been speaking this from the beginning of Gospel of Mark. There are a number of instances where Jesus casts out these evil demons, and they say things like, Jesus, you are the Son of the living God. What are you doing to us? Oddly, the evil spirits know the right answer. Obviously, they're not Christians. And the first line of the entire Gospel of Mark is this: the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. So, the truth is actually in the very first sentence of the entire Bible, of the entire Gospel of Mark. You could ask the question, since that's the great truth, that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, why didn't Mark just stop there? But notice that little line, the beginning of the good news of Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. It's story time. It's that kind of invitation to sit back and listen. Once upon a time, there was a man named Jesus. This mysterious man named Jesus. And so there's a sense in which, beyond being an answer book, the Gospels are a story before they are a bunch of doctrines to believe. They are a story that we are invited to live into, about this mysterious man who heals and teaches and then chooses by his own volition to lay down his life and die at the hands of the oppressive authorities, and then mysteriously is raised from the dead. Such a story. And consider the peculiar ending of the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark, of the four Gospels, has the strangest ending of all of them. The women come to the tomb. The angels tell them that Jesus isn't here, he's risen. And this is the last verse of Mark's Gospel. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. That's the last thing Mark wrote. That's not an ending of a story. And that's the point. The story doesn't end there. Where does the story go from there? Well, it goes to this moment here. The story continues, and we are invited to live into the story, to find our place in the story. And there's a sense in which, although it can be helpful to think of the Bible as being an answer book, if we see it as a storybook, what it is also is that it is a book that asks us questions. Questions to live with. In the particular reading we just had from Bob, there are 3 questions asked. You heard them. The first one is relatively easy. It's the kind of question you can ask and then you look it up on Wikipedia. What do people say that, what do people say that I am, says Jesus? And they say the prophet, or John the Baptist, or Elijah. That's an easy question. You can Google it today. The second question, however, is altogether different from the first question. But who do you say that I am? It is a personal question that engages us. And though Peter has the right answer, quite clearly it is to be an ongoing question that he answers on different levels as the story continues. And the third question, and it seems really clear that although it might sound at first like Peter has aced the exam, he hasn't aced the exam. He goes on. And then there is the third question that's asked in our passage by Jesus. What does it profit a person that he gained the whole world but forfeit his life or his soul? That too is not a question you answer once and for all. That too is a question you struggle with, you live with. There are plenty of preachers, and maybe sometimes I'm one of those preachers, who wants to gain the whole world rather than to truly proclaim the gospel. It's an ongoing struggle and temptation to ask the question, what should the energies of my life be devoted to, and what are they unworthy of being devoted to? It's a question to live with. And consider the answers, the different answers that Peter himself would have come up with in the course of the story as it progresses in the Gospel of Mark and in the other Gospels. Who is Jesus for you, Peter? Jesus is the one who called me out of the boat to walk upon the water, to step out in faith in the face of my fears. Jesus is the one who saved me when I was about to drown in those waters. Jesus is the one who washed my feet, and I felt a sense of shame and unworthiness before this wonder of this man acting like a servant to me. Jesus is the one who knew that I would become a coward at that moment when I thought I would be so brave, and that I would deny him 3 times before the cock crowed. And then, in that story in the Gospel of John, Jesus is the one who came to me in my shame and brokenness and fed me breakfast and told me he loved me in spite of all my failings. And ended it by saying, what? Feed my sheep. Jesus is the one who ends up saying, feed my sheep. So faith is living out a story. It is not a matter of having all the answers. It is not a matter of certainty. Certainty is the opposite almost of faith. Faith is this fundamental trust that even though we do not know the answers, all the answers, we trust that the one who is asking us the questions ultimately loves us, cares for us. And so we live out these questions. And there is something that is very unfortunate when people of the church claim to give easy answers to hard questions, questions that have to be lived with. For instance, that question, why does a good and loving God allow there to be so much suffering and pain in this world? And I bet that Pat Robertson has an answer to that. But if you're in the midst of some excruciating pain, that answer ain't going to do it for you. That's the kind of question you have to live with and seek as you go through the dark valley, some kind of working answer. There's this powerful story from Corrie ten Boom. Perhaps some of you know her. She was a Christian author, but she wrote out a powerful experience of having been in a Dutch concentration camp that the Nazis put her in Ravensbrück. And it was, one of those truly hellish places to be. She was with 10,000 other women in this horrible and hideous conditions. And they were gathered in the barracks in the midst of their beds. It was cold, and they were hungry and lice-ridden. And her sister in this story that I heard is leading a little Bible story there in the midst of it all. And then this woman is sitting on her bunk and listening to the whole thing. She can't contain herself after a while, and she just shrieks, "If your God is such a good God, why does he allow this suffering?" And dramatically she tears off the bandages and the rags that bound her hands, displaying her broken, mangled fingers, and says, "I'm the first violinist of the symphony orchestra. Did your God will this?" And for a moment there were no answers whatsoever. And then Corrie ten Boom stepped forward and spoke. And what she said is this, as she records in her biography: "We can't answer that question. All we know is that our God came to this earth and became one of us, and he suffered with us, and was crucified and died, and that he did it for love." And so in the end, we don't get an answer, we don't get an intellectual answer. What we get is this powerful story that we're invited to get engaged with. And the thing about stories is that they continually ask us questions. What does the story mean? What character do you identify with? What's happening to the characters as they move along? And how does this all relate to us? This story asks us questions. And Jesus says, Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. In my experience, there is a shift in the journey. In the course of our relationship with Jesus, there are most appropriate times when we are asking Jesus for things. Jesus, give me healing. Jesus, give me reconciliation. Jesus, give me hope. Give me healing. And that's appropriate. It's part of Peter crying out. But the journey involves a shift so that in time we stop asking so much, Jesus, come do what we want you to do, to asking, Jesus, what can we do for you? What can we do for you in bringing your healing and love to this broken, painful world? And when we begin to make that shift, it can make a profound difference in our lives. There's been something that's happened in my life this summer I've told some of you about. It's complicated. It was not something I would have asked to happen. It was troublesome, problematic. And someone asked me recently, what's God calling for you to do in this? And I appreciated the question, because I began to ask, no, this isn't something I chose to happen, but what is it that I can do for God in this situation? And there was a kind of freedom that came to me in regard to dealing with this problem. And I feel blessed. There's this powerful story in the book of Acts where Paul and Silas are preaching the gospel, and they get arrested by the authorities, and they get thrown into prison, and they're in the basement of the jail with shackles on their legs, and they've been beaten and whipped, and they are there in the deepest darkness of midnight with all these other prisoners. And it seems clear that they are not in their prayer saying, Jesus, Jesus, get us out of here, get us out of here, get us out of here. What we're told is they were singing songs of praise to God in the deepest darkness. And the others who were there took notice. And when we are able to make that shift from, come, Jesus, help me, to Jesus, what can I do for you? Then space is opened up. It is that part of that mystery of denying ourselves and following, that when we yield and say, here I am, Lord, space is open for the Spirit to move. And in that story, mysteriously, in that darkest hour, when they weren't even asking for deliverance, suddenly an earthquake breaks open the prison cell. All the shackles fall off. The jailer is about to cut himself open, to kill himself, because he's now going to be responsible for all of these prisoners who are going to get set free. And Paul stops him from doing that and shares the gospel. And that night, the jailer becomes a follower of Jesus. And I suspect many of those fellow prisoners. So what is it I can do for you, Jesus? We get preoccupied with that question of what can Jesus do for us? But what can I do for you? In this situation I find myself, what can I do? What kind of witness to the light can I be about? What is the question that is being asked of me that I must live with? And in the living, perhaps slowly, gradually, begin to see glimmers of an answer. Please pray with me. Truly, O God, you gave us this gift of life out of the mystery that is your great love. And many things happen in the course of this journey, the story of our lives, that we do not understand. But we have the good news of the gospel, of how you came among us in Jesus, who healed the sick and fed the hungry and reached out to the outcasts. And then he went to Jerusalem and offered himself in the face of the oppression of the religious authorities and the Romans as a sacrificial death, an offering of love. And then you raised him from the dead. Help us, O Lord, to live into this story with our stories. Help us to find that way in which we would find our particular cross to take up and follow you, wherever it is we find ourselves, to find some way to bear your witness to the light in the darkness. We ask this in Jesus' name.